Some folks are starting to deal with ocular degeneration, which means they're having difficulty reading. So I write a reflection every week. And so I wrote one this week, and I am giving it to you audibly so that for those who are having difficulty reading, they will hear what my reflection is all about. The reflection this week is to retain or to forgive. On the first Easter night, the very first one that Jesus was resurrected, he entered a room where the disciples were, and they were scared and freaked out. And he said to them, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I send you." He breathed on the Holy Spirit on them and then said, "If you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven. If you retain the sins of any, they are retained." I find it interesting that what the apostles remembered most about that night was that Jesus said, "Peace, sent, and forgive." And I'd like to talk to you about that last part, the forgive part. Over the centuries, the institutional church has interpreted this phrase to mean that the church can decide to forgive sins and the church can decide to retain sins, as in to not forgive. I respectfully disagree with the retaining part. I completely agree with the forgiving part. A seminary professor of ethics told us when one should offer absolution and when absolution should be withheld. And the reason why is that there are some people that seek out a priest not seeking forgiveness, but permission. And when permission for sins is given, that's entirely different than absolution. So I would agree with my professor about when to absolve, when not. But back to the point about the church retaining the sins, that's not our role. You see, retaining sins and forgiving sins is up to God. And if God chooses to forgive, even Hitler, then God forgives. God's grace and God's love are just that big. And I don't think that, oh, and the second part is that humans have a tendency to hold on to things that give us power. And we tend to also like to concentrate power into our institutions. And so then, if you can say whose sins are forgiven and whose are not, that tends to give you power. And I don't think that this was Jesus's point. When Jesus said, "I send you," I think that's the key to this passage. Like a parent who sends a child off to high school, the child can decide what to do, and the parent, for the most part, has to watch. Jesus sent the disciples out and said that if you forgive the sins of others, they are forgiven. But you also have the choice to not forgive. The disciples went out and started living a life of forgiveness. The Bible shows us that one of the first groups of people that they forgave were the very people who sent Jesus to the cross. And it seems like they did this out of the sense that they knew they had been forgiven and that they passed along the forgiveness that they had received, just like the prayer, "Forgive us as we have been forgiven." Bear in mind, however, that they could have chosen not to forgive, but to retain and to blame and to exclude. So think of it this way. A comedian said, "Honesty is the best policy, but it's not the only policy." So the best way to live is to forgive, but it's not the only way to live. It's just the best way. Jesus sends us out too, with the breath of God, with the Holy Spirit, with the hope and the ability to forgive as we have been forgiven. But it is not the only policy.